BC's fish farming industry has divided scientists, governments, and First Nations up and down the coast for the last 30 years.
Make no mistake, we're not going to stop until the fish farms are out.
Many believe the industry is an ecological disaster waiting to happen. A breeding ground for disease that has decimated the surrounding environment and wildlife, namely Pacific salmon. While others see the farms as an essential part of the provincial economy, one that provides steady jobs and meets a growing demand for fresh seafood. With battle lines being drawn across the province, striking a balance between economic prosperity, environmental protection, and Indigenous sovereignty has become critical.
We're not going to stop. We've had enough.
Just off the northeastern coast of Vancouver Island, Hereditary Chief Willie Moon is setting course for the Midsummer Island fish farm. Along for the journey are his daughter Sherry and 2 young grandchildren. The family is Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw, and the farm is in the middle of their people's traditional unceded territory. The coastal waters of the Broughton Archipelago are breathtaking. But look a little closer and you'll find a region in turmoil. This massive floating structure is the Midsummer Island Fish Farm, home to over 500,000 farmed Atlantic salmon. It's owned by Marine Harvest, a Norwegian company that operates nearly half of all fish farms in the province. In the last few weeks, the company and its farms have become the epicenter of a First Nations-led protest against the industry.
A lot of our smolts that do come out of our river systems, you know, they're stopping by these farms, and then they're getting attacked by the sea lice. So we lose about 50 or 60% of our smolts every year. And that's, you know, if that continues, we're not going to have salmon in 5 years, 10 years' time.
BC's wild Pacific salmon stocks have been on a steady decline for decades, and there are many theories behind the disappearance. But ask one of the occupiers and they'll tell you the blame lies squarely with the fish farms.
What's happened here over the years is there been sick fish have been coming into our mainland and killing our regular runs. The fish farms have viruses and sea lice and all kinds of diseases that have been emptying out our rivers.
And fish don't belong in cages. They're, you know, supposed to be free and wild.
Here at Midsummer, they farm Atlantic salmon, not Pacific. They are raised in large open net pens like this one, which are meant to keep them isolated and safe from predators. But it's not what can get in the nets that's concerning, it's what might be getting out.
The problem with fish farms is that they crowd the fish together so the disease spreads, and then they don't let the predators in, so nobody's cleaning up the dying fish, so they remain contagious.
It's an alarm that independent biologist Alexandra Morton has been sounding for decades. Morton has teamed up with the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and it's here aboard the research vessel Martin Sheen that she patrols the fish farms, seeking out viruses and disease.
The major concerns for me is the proliferation of sea lice, because I have studied that. Sea lice are easy to study. They're eating wild salmon to death. Our pink and chum salmon are only this big when they go by the farms. It doesn't take many lice. And the second enormous problem right now is this Piscine reovirus. Over 80% of the industry is infected. Marine Harvest told the court 5 out of 6 of their hatcheries are infected, and it's highly contagious.
Morton is convinced that sea lice and diseases like Piscine reovirus are being transferred from the fish farms to the wild salmon. And while direct proof is next to impossible to come by, Morton says the weight of evidence is undeniable. And it's footage like this, taken at a fish farm operated by Grieg Seafood, showing deformed and diseased-looking fish and workers scrambling to remove them from the pens, that she finds the most disturbing.
These farms, each one of them are just pouring pathogens, sea lice, viruses, probably bacteria too, but I don't study them. They are the biggest industrial spill in the history of Canada because it's been ongoing for 30 years. And the problem with these sea lice and viruses is they're basically salmon smart bombs. They are designed to find and infect salmon, and that's what they're doing.
But the occupations aren't only about what's happening below the surface. Farms like this one at Swanson Island, also owned by Marine Harvest, are operating on traditional unceded territory. And according to the occupiers, the time for diplomacy is over.
Gotta get to sleep early, got a big day tomorrow. The time for discussions, negotiations, and planning processes has passed. For 30 long years, our people have been asking for the removal of these farms, and we just don't seem to be getting anywhere. I don't believe that these fish are natural, and I think that they're breaking all kinds of natural laws that we as the First People really understand.
Ernest Alfred is a school teacher from the Namgis First Nation. He has been occupying the Swanson Island fish farm for the last 15 days.
This is no longer a scientific debate. The science is there that supports our claim. This is a real First Nations title and rights issue. Our people have been really disrespected in terms of our rights and title around here, and that we've asked this company to respect and these companies to respect our rights as First Nations people. We've never given our consent for this to be here.
Keep in mind, farms like this one aren't breaking any laws. They're fully licensed and permitted to operate in the region by both the federal and provincial governments. And while Marine Harvest does have agreements with a number of First Nations up and down the coast, the question of consent is anything but settled.
This is our house. This land belongs to my people, and that these companies have been renting, and they've done a crummy job, and they're being evicted, and we're not giving their deposit back.
Back at Midsummer, Chief Moon is checking on a boat that was spotted circling the farm. He believes it's the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. It's actually the RCMP.
These are the Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw territory, unceded territory. We have never given these guys the rights to be in our territory and to poison our waters.
What they're doing is illegal. How come you're not getting them out of here?
What law would they do?
They've never consulted.
They've never consulted with our nations, any of our nations, to put these farms in here. We're tired of voicing our concerns. It falls on deaf ears. Nobody's listening. Now we have to take action to stop these guys.
The confrontation ends peacefully, but that's short-lived, as this massive freighter arrives to restock the farm with thousands of juvenile salmon.
So before you guys start any work, could I talk to your skipper?
I can ask him if he can come down. Yeah.
Why don't you come down?
The skipper never comes out of his wheelhouse, and the group's efforts to stop the restocking prove futile. It's a bitter pill to swallow, the first of many during the coming months.
You're allowing a foreign ship into our territory, so I want to see those documents.
When we come back,
obviously you've seen the pictures and the footage of disease and deformed looking fish in your pens. Is that the case? Are these fish farms impacting wild salmon?
As the occupation of the Midsummer Island fish farm enters its third month, 21-year-old Melina Dawson is digging in for the long haul. Dawson is Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw and has been a part of the protest from the start.
We can't afford to have these farms here. They do too much damage to our wild fish and to our way of life and to this environment. So I'm going to stay here until they're gone.
With the occupation gaining more support each day, demonstrations and protests were also ramping up back on the mainland.
Now is the beginning of the interruption, and we cannot stand down.
But the moment was fleeting. In December of 2017, the BC Supreme Court granted Marine Harvest an injunction against the protesters, marking an official end to the occupation.
What we have is an industry now using the court system, which is supposed to be able to deal out justice for all Canadians. They're using this to limit public protest. They're using this to be bullies from the corporate world into the Canadian citizenship and those of First Nations. And this is utterly unacceptable.
It's crew change at the Midsummer Island fish farm. Things have settled down in the weeks since the injunction was granted. Gone are the makeshift shacks, tents, and protesters, and it's back to business as usual. Maurice Isaac is a member of the Clowetsis Nation. He is also the site manager here at Midsummer. He knew most of the Indigenous protesters that occupied the farms over the last few months. Many of them were from his home community of Alert Bay.
There's been a lot of disrespect thrown at us, a lot of slander, a lot of name calling, just intimidation, filming us, documenting us, harassing us while we work. It's not very respectful.
I understand you want to protest. If you cross inside of there, you're in extreme danger.
According to Isaac, the occupation wasn't as peaceful as it was made out to be. He says staff were verbally abused and harassed daily by the occupiers.
Just get the f*** out, take the fish out. That's all we want. Jesus.
And many were concerned with their personal safety. There were also reports of family members being targeted in their home communities.
It's a bit hard and stressful because they attack us and they paint this ugly picture of the industry, which I do not feel is anything ugly about it. We're not perfect industry, but we do everything we can to try and be perfect.
While it may not be a perfect industry, it's certainly a profitable one. Salmon farming took in nearly $600 million in 2016 alone, and the demand is only growing. Here in Campbell River, the industry has also provided commercial fishermen like Harold Seawood steady work when many businesses are going under.
I am a clan chief of the Musgamagw clan from the Dzawada'enuxw people. The world is growing in the need for having seafood. Every year it's growing more and more, and if we didn't have a fish farm or aquaculture in general, I dare say that we would fish out all our stocks on the ocean.
Seawood does contract work for various aquaculture companies, including Marine Harvest. But as a hereditary chief, his loyalties lie with the land and his people. If he thought the fish farms were having an impact on the wild salmon, he says he wouldn't hesitate to raise the alarm.
I told them if I saw something that was concerning to me about their industry, I would tell them. If it wasn't addressed immediately, then I would tell others, and if it still wasn't addressed, I will find a way to shut them down. But I have not seen anything that is alarming. Everything that I have seen rebounds very quickly.
But more than environmental concerns, the protests and occupations were about asserting Indigenous rights and title. The fish farms are operating on the unceded traditional territory of a number of First Nations, and they've never given the companies consent to be there.
You know, it's interesting because in Canada, of course, First Nations have a constitutional right for consultation. And this can happen any time that business within a territory may impact their rights. It's unfortunate that a few individuals seem to have bypassed or ignored consultation and moved right to intimidation and harassment.
Ian Roberts is Marine Harvest Canada's spokesperson. He's witnessed firsthand the polarizing effect his industry has had in the region.
That are coming back to our rivers, those that are being killed off when they're coming out of our river system.
It was very stressful for staff. You can imagine going to work every day and having people yelling at you. We simply asked them to sit around a table and discuss their concerns, and we're very willing to make changes to our business. But we can't make changes to our business if the other party isn't going to sit down and talk with us.
Roberts insists that the industry is highly regulated. Salmon here at Midsummer are regularly tested for health and vaccinated to protect against viruses and disease. And as for the footage of the deformed and sick-looking fish captured by the occupiers over the summer,
it's unfortunate that those images have come to represent what we do for some people, because let me be clear that those images were caught by activists that were trespassing on our farms. They had access of hours and hours just waiting for that one fish to swim by so they could concentrate on it. That fish doesn't represent the remaining fish in our pen.
But what about the spread of parasites and disease? It's no secret that Piscine reovirus and sea lice are found in both farmed and wild salmon along the BC coast. And now an emerging disease called heart and skeletal muscle inflammation, or HSMI, the number 3 killer of farmed salmon in Norway, has been found in the province as well. It all begs the question:
are these fish farms impacting wild salmon?
No, our fish don't impact the health and populations of wild salmon. And that's just not me talking, that's not opinion, that is fact. There's been several reviews on the coast here over in the last 5, 10, 20 years that have confirmed that our salmon aren't negatively impacting wild salmon.
So are those the Chinook salmon? Yeah, Chinook salmon.
And it's here at the Pacific Research Center in Nanaimo that DFO scientists like Dr. Christy Miller are keeping a close watch on the industry.
The spread of disease from farm salmon, certainly there's a lot of information on sea lice for that, and there's been a lot of study on that. In terms of the spread of disease of other kinds of things like viruses and bacteria and microparasites that you can't visualize with your naked eye, there is absolutely a theoretical risk of spread between farmed and wild populations, and also transmission between wild and farm populations, so it can go both ways.
So a theoretical risk, but enough of a concern to keep Miller and her team busy. Her department has launched the largest study ever done on how disease spreads in both farmed and wild salmon. It's the same research that helped identify HSMI in farmed salmon along the coast.
HSMI in the farm population that we worked on was present on the farm for 11 months. Now, only a very small percentage of those fish on that farm died. Okay, so is it important to the aquaculture industry? It may not be, at least on that particular farm, because they didn't have significant mortality. It didn't affect their bottom line. Is it important potentially if disease could be caused by the same virus to wild fish? Absolutely.
While Miller can't say for certain whether or not viruses and disease are being transferred from fish farms to wild salmon, she's confident that the evidence is out there.
In short, I do think that there will be some things, some infectious diseases that will be a risk. and then it'll be up to the managers and the regulators and the industry to determine how best to manage around that risk.
But exactly where the federal and provincial governments stand in all of this is still murky. Neither Fisheries Minister Dominique LeBlanc or BC Premier John Horgan made themselves available to answer our questions. But with many of the fish farms up for license renewal this summer, they won't be able to stay silent for much longer. While the official occupation of BC's fish farms has come to an end, the debate over the industry and its practices are far from over. And for salmon protectors like Melina Dawson, there's just too much at stake to turn back.
I think I just love my home and this environment. It's just an amazingly unique place. Too much to give up? Like, that's not really an option, because we stand to lose a lot more by giving up than we have to lose to keep fighting.
She would like see them taking photos of her.
I think there's some definite cold feet coming from the RCMP.
Why would a nurse call me? Why not the RCMP?